Hi, I'm Dr. Kristy Taylor, founder of WORxK Solutions LLC, and I am so excited to kick off episode 2 with my girl, Dr. Sarah Ratekin of DEI Conversations, Drink, Eat, and Intelligent Conversations. Let me quickly turn it over to Sarah to introduce herself, and then we'll jump into today's conversation.
Hey, Kristy, good to see you again. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Ratekin. I am the Chief Happiness Officer at Happiness is Courage, LLC. I'm really deeply interested in how we can create happier workplaces through that employee experience. So I'm jazzed for this topic. This is my jam.
Sarah, do you know that I realized in almost the past year that I keep on seeing Ratekin or something like that for your name? Do you know that the country part of me refuses to see a T?
I mean, I married into the name, so I don't care.
So we said that this is supposed to be drink, eat, and conversation. So what are you drinking?
Well, speaking of country, I have some iced tea.
I got water again.
I got iced tea, so I leveled up, and I brought seaweed snacks this time. Yep. How about you?
And I got my salad toppers with bacon and pecans that I've eaten half the bag with no salad. So we're just real people.
It's a start.
Having real conversations. Now, if this is your first time tuning into DEI Conversations, this series is really designed to bring together us as thought leaders, professionals, and change makers to explore the complexities and opportunities of fostering an inclusive work environment and workplace happiness. So Drink, Eat, and Intelligent Conversations, it provides a laid-back atmosphere for engaging in meaningful dialogue and exchanging ideas in a relaxed and approachable setting. And our goal really is to be authentic. That's why we're drinking a bottle of water and eating salad toppers and some seaweed for our snacks today. But we really are focusing on providing you with actionable insights and diving into the matters that really matter most in today's workforce. And this is really anything from self-awareness to emotional well-being. We're not necessarily here to report the news. We're here to talk about, because who knows when this will air, but we are talking about the things that don't change really within any organizational environment. So this is really a timeless podcast that we're creating, because so much of what we are doing is relevant. And so we're going to do 4 episodes. We've already filmed episode 1, which was inclusive, begins with I. So if you have not listened to it, make sure you go and tune in. But today we're going to talk about something that is going to bring Sarah so much joy and happiness. And we're going to talk about the science of workplace joy. Can people really be happy at work? Because happiness at work is more than a feel-good concept. It actually helps to drive engagement, believe it or not. And so I'm going to just, before we even start with the conversation as a whole, I'm going to actually allow you to kick this off, Sarah, and just come in swinging with your thoughts on this topic of workplace joy.
So spoiler alert, the answer is yes. People can find happiness at work. I know that goes against just about every corporate paradigm ever, certainly since Henry Ford. But I really think that this is a conversation that is ripe because so many people are so stinking miserable in their jobs. And there is this sort of common narrative that says that's why it's called work, because it sucks and you just get over it. You'll retire someday and then it'll be great. But the reality is too many people die before they retire or shortly after retirement. And in the years leading up to that, when we're all miserable together, that just creates an absolute dumpster fire of an experience for all of us. It is wasteful of our energy. It is disrespectful of our peers. And it certainly is not taking the best care of ourselves as we navigate through life. So I think this topic is something that we need to be talking about more often. And for the bean counters in the audience, when your employees are feeling good about their life and hopeful about their prospects, they will stick around longer, they will work harder, and all of the metrics that you care about are going to go up. So let's talk about how to make that happen.
That was actually going to be my first question to you. Because, these snacks are actually so good. It's so much better as an individual snack than on a piece of lettuce. I can truly taste the bacon, But, we talk a lot about workplace culture, and we're talking about this thing in DEI, in the midst DEIA. Let me make sure I say the whole thing. In the midst of a controversial season for DEIA, right? But we understand as facilitators and leaders in this space is that you can put a Band-Aid on it, but it's still a sore. It's still bleeding. Hello. Okay. Sometimes you got to pour some alcohol on this thing and burn it out. And so the conversation has to keep going. Now, when you talk about this data, right? You were giving some throwing some interesting stats at me prior to us recording this episode. So my first question to you is, in a space where you're doing this work, how do you use data to measure the impact of workplace happiness? It's kind of a conversation that we kind of started in episode 1, but I would just love to hear some like the most recent data and how you're using data as a driver.
I talk about this a lot. There really isn't a way to objectively measure happiness at work. There are some instruments that are being developed by researchers to look at that specific topic, but happiness is such a subjective experience because it is an emotion, and emotions are very subjective and dependent upon the person having the emotion, the environment in which that's happening, and all of the factors that go into emotional literacy. So I don't know that we want to necessarily try to measure happiness, but what we do want to see is what happens when people report that they are feeling more happy or more hopeful. Those are both positive emotions in the workspace, or frankly, in their greater lives as a whole. So some of the statistics that we look at in this space that indicate that people are having a better emotional time at work are they sticking around? What's your employee retention rate look like? It is not the only factor, but it is a huge one. What does your productivity look like? And that depends on what your industry is, how you measure productivity, but happier employees are more engaged and therefore are more likely to, stick around and do hard work. Absenteeism is a great indicator. Maybe people are actually not actually absent. Maybe they're interviewing for other jobs, but regardless, they're actually not at the office or in front of their computers or whatever, doing the work that you're paying
out that you can be in front of your computer and still do work. Just want to point that out. You do not
absolutely
have to be in that office, right? And sometimes we're more productive working from home.
Absolutely. And that brings up a great point, Kristy. So when I think about happiness, to me, that's a core component of well-being. And so I'm curious what your take is on how leaders can actually cultivate well-being, both for themselves and for the people that they're leading.
Well, Sarah, we're living in a space now where it's like leaders are like, I'm not responsible for your individual well-being. Yeah. Right? That's the kind of, it seems like that's kind of where we're getting back to this almost like a slave narrative type of culture, in people are kind of, it's complex because we as humans, there's always some level of hierarchy. I'm going to refer to this Maslow's hierarchy of needs that I keep going back to, but the human psyche is really interesting, right? You can be on the same playing field as other people, but you will strike out against yourself just to one up somebody else, right? And it's kind of like, well, we need to be measuring what people are doing. If they're, you might have somebody who's delivering projects for you back to back to back and getting you results, but you want to measure how long they're sitting on the computer just so you can know that they're productive. And then you'll have people going, yeah, we need to do that, right? It's like, hey, you know what I mean? I mean, you're probably working middle class too. So you should probably be aware that if this happens to one group, it can happen to you. I want to go back to the most basic things that, from an organizational culture perspective, again, I always go back to my own framework that I use, which is that the RABT DEI framework for inclusive organizations. But I also want to bring up Maslow's hierarchies of needs because we kind of started talking about this. And I think that this is one that everybody's familiar with. Physiological needs, safety, love and belonging, esteem needs, and self-actualization. Hey, we talk about that so much on an individual level, but it's applicable to organizational cultures, right? When I went to my job the other day and it was a snowstorm. And I've been, and it's just like, I like working there so much. It's just like, oh, the building closed. You know what I mean? I don't want to be there every day. Don't get me wrong. But because I have a work in a full-time environment where all of these needs are being met. So whereas on one hand, we're telling kind of like this stern boss, we're going back to this model of like, you work here, the Henry Ford factory model, just plug and play, right? Like you work in, right. But what if we, from an organizational culture standpoint, when we talk about meeting the emotional needs of our staff and really being supported, if we just look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Are we creating environments where, and I'm saying in an office environment, physiological needs might be different, but people do need sleep. I'm talking about the physical environment itself, but as a whole, when they leave work, they need work-life balance. Are we helping our employees to get to meet their physiological needs? Are we paying them enough so that they can afford food and water? And are we overworking them so they're not getting enough sleep, which is, that would mean that their physiological needs. So work-life balance is important. When we talked about inclusivity in that last episode, the I is for inclusion, and how we as leaders can really focus on breaking down those barriers, because you made a great point regarding how within each little siloed group, there's culture, right? And I encourage us to look at culture as a whole, because if you're siloed, that's really part of your organizational culture. Do people feel safe? Can I speak up? When I have a concern, can I speak up? Do I feel like I belong to this organization? Have you ever had a job where you just like, the work is cool, but I don't really feel like I belong here? And so that's why you have people that, we talk about those stats of people leaving within 6 months. They might have came with good intentions, but maybe they didn't feel like they belong. And are we doing things like awards, rewards, recognizing employees, doing things to build their esteem? Are we, that pyramid, people remember, the whole goal is to get people to the point of self-actualization. And when we talk about self-actualization and having people to achieve their full potential, that is where we get into employee retention and employees that get somewhere and say, you know what, I want to stay here. I want to be engaged. I want to be active. So when you're doing this work, Sarah, what are some of your biggest obstacles to creating these systems that support employee well? When you're doing this, like how do you create these systems that support employee well-being? Because I just want to say, before I hand this back over to you, we are really educating people here. I'm using my hands a lot because I feel like I'm teaching, right? We're really educating people here, because people think that this stuff exists in a silo. Like, well, they're happy. They're not happy just because they're not happy. No, it's your whole work environment. So you have to create a system for engaged employees. So how do you go about doing that?
I think one of the biggest obstacles really is that organizations have decided that it is not their responsibility to create happiness. And I would actually say that that's true. You cannot create happiness for anybody else. However, it is the organization's responsibility to create a space where people feel like they are included, they belong, they have autonomy to a level that is reasonable, they have space to make mistakes, to be innovative, to be creative. But really, there are some interesting conversations around this, because oftentimes when we talk about happiness in the workplace, people say, well, we don't have a money tree, we can't give them any more money, or it always comes back to salaries. And the reality is, for a lot of people, if you are not making enough money to meet your basic needs, you will not be happy, nor should you be. If you're happy when your life is in a dumpster fire, that's a psychological challenge. You should probably see a therapist, right? That's not a healthy space to be in. So that's a different conversation. If people are not being paid enough to meet their needs, that needs to be addressed. However, for people who are making enough money, who have enough resources to keep the lights on, feed their kids, do the things that they like to do some of the time, then the factors that create happiness are radically different. And they are really two things. The first is, do people understand how or if the work that they're doing is meaningful? And that can happen in lots of different ways. And number two is, do people have good quality reciprocal relationships with people that they spend time with? Those are things that organizations absolutely can and should be focusing on, because that's where the magic happens. And I think we see this all the time. Like, sales departments have a great understanding of how that work that they do meets a need, right? They can see a direct line from their efforts to what the company values most, which is revenue. Cool. The accountants usually don't. The accounting department is typically one of the least happy when we talk about organizational culture, because the accountants don't necessarily see a direct line to the energy that they're spending every day. They come in, they do their work, they go home. They come in, they do their work. There is no accountant of the year award that happens. There is no, you don't usually see somebody from the accounting department put up on the stage at the end of the year award ceremony for most innovative experience of the year. And because the work is pretty repetitive, that's the word, repetitive, there's not a sense of accomplishment that happens in that space either. So leaders can really choose to help people see how that thread pulls through, tie things back to the organizational goals, create pathways for understanding of how we're spending our time in meaningful ways. And if you can't, then you're probably in a place where the work that you're doing actually isn't all that useful. And maybe that's a conversation around what a job is actually meant to be doing anyway. When it comes to relationships, I think this is where we get the tension between working at home and working in the office. Now, I am not here to say that 5 days in the office, 9 hours a day, plus a 3-hour commute is the best way to get to nirvana. However, organizations need to be thinking about how they are creating space for relationships to happen, because those are a super huge indicator of whether or not somebody is going to find job satisfaction and honestly life satisfaction. And I think this happens when we see people treated as humans and not as cogs in a great corporate machine. So how are we creating those connections within our teams? How are we creating those stronger relationships to nurture each other, to navigate through the complexity of life in a corporate setting? How are we doing the work that we do in a way that is interconnected and sees people as people? Isolation is killing us, and that's true for our civilian life, but it's also true for our corporate experiences. But I think this is a mindset that we're talking about here, right? It's not that organizations can't do this, it's that they think that they don't need to, or that they don't know how. So when this happens, when people find these spaces that really work, that's when we start to see joy bubbling up, because people feel seen, they feel heard, they feel valued, they matter, and they matter for more than just their portion of the profit margin. I'm wondering, right? I think you probably have seen this a lot too. So speaking of joy in the workplace, a lot of it is emotion. That's an emotion, right? And emotions are based on our mindset. So how do you think that personal mindset plays into this whole conversation?
It goes back to that accountability thing, right? Because, I want the good old trickle down economics of leadership. I can't help it. I had a history class start this week. So, look, I cannot get off the top of this pyramid that I keep on. It trickles down, right? But leadership is not associated with title. I've said that before. But when we talk about the mindset, you have to understand the cultural mindset of your organization. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the first episode, where we were talking about these siloed pieces of these within these organizational culture. But if there are silos within your organizational culture, that is, as a whole, your organizational culture. And leaders have to work to break down those barriers. And so when we're talking about mindset, it really starts with you as an individual and as a leader really recognizing that how you contribute, that a good old trickle down effect to the overall mindset of your organization and culture. When I say mindset for organization, I'm looking at culture, right? And creating joy at work. Because are you really leading those initiatives? Like, first of all, are you paying attention to all of those things that look like, if we said this was a dashboard, we've talked about the things like employee engagement, no absenteeism, right? And all of those things you can kind of have on a dashboard reporting metrics that you can be tracking and looking at. But what about just the human side of you just being a human and working on connecting with your team and your staff, right? It doesn't, I can give you 1,000 books to read on how to be a leader, how to lead change, how to facilitate organizational processes. But you could just be a human. I could just go to your desk and say, "Hey, Sarah, how you doing today?" Right? And making people feel appreciated. Is it a big deal to say, if you know that your accounting department is not happy, what is the huge deal to say you're in a meeting? So I know my accounting department is not happy. They're not always recognized, but they were the people who helped us when it came to, maybe we had to meet the fiscal year end of deadline. I just stand up in that meeting and go, I just want to recognize our accounting team who played a vital role in helping us to meet these deadlines. They cost $0. You know what I mean? So it's just, when we talk about this mindset, I think one is just really as individuals. So let me start with leaders in the titles, leaders with the titles, right? You as leaders recognizing your impact on the organizational culture. And although you can look at all of those meaningful metrics, you being human and seeking ways to really connect, and it doesn't cost anything to just recognize people. We, like, in our meetings, we have these little kudos. We take a moment to just do these kudos, and we just tell people thank you. And you can set that up in your office, where maybe you have a form where if somebody does something nice, people can submit their name. People just want to be recognized and have a sense of connection. Now, on the other hand, when we're talking about, and so, well, let me finish there, because on the other hand, what are we as individuals doing for our own happiness? There's an accountability piece there, right? Because a job is only going to give you so much. You know, I'm sure you've heard that saying that somebody died, like that little meme, somebody died, and then, you know, like the next day, they dedicated their whole life to the job, and then they died, and it took 24 hours later, the job was advertising their position, right? And so there's some individual accountability too. When we talk about mindset and just as I'm talking to the average everyday worker in terms of how we're going to really embrace that. I'm really a person who believes in manifesting what you want and being grateful for what you have in this moment. And if you want to get to that next level, your mindset has to be willing to play ball. So
absolutely,
you know, your personal mindset also is about creating joy for yourself and appreciating the little things about your life. Where can you find moments of joy? You know, Sarah, this weekend I was at drill, and for 20 years I've been trying to learn how to sew. Now, if you follow me on Facebook, you know that there's a long-standing standoff between me and my mama and a sewing machine, because she would not buy me one when I was like 12. Well, somebody finally bought me one, but this weekend my first sergeant took time and showed me how to sew, and I made him a whole pillow. That was a tiny pillow. Somebody was like, "Is that a dog pillow?" But the point was, it was just a small gesture of appreciation, and out of that, I experienced a small set of joy. So holistically, when I'm answering this question, I can give you all kinds of statistics and stuff that we'll talk about over and over again about employee engagement, retention, and all of the technicalities of workforce development and running an organization. But I just think twofold. You might not recognize your impact at an individual level when you count it all joy. Now, I'm not saying to be disillusioned. That doesn't mean to go into a toxic work environment every day and feel like, because I've been there, you know, had a good job. I wanted to stay at that job. So even though it was, oh my God, toxic is all, it was just toxic. I tried to wake up and say, I'm going to do this every day for 30 years. And I'm not, because I have worked to get this job. Don't do that. Don't disillusion yourself. But at an individual level, you can work on having a positive mindset to embrace. Like, I hate taking the train into DC. I hate it. But I've learned to put on some headphones and just enjoy the fact that I don't have to drive. I get joy out of that, because dealing with the traffic is so much worse. Maybe reading a book, just enjoying the experience of getting you there, and then making plans within your career, because that's the career coach in me, to get yourself to the next level. And then as a leader, recognizing how you are driving your organizational culture and doing those things just to be human and build connection. Now imagine that 1 + 1 and how that equals 2, right? You got an individual who's coming in, who's really taking accountability for themselves and their own personal joy and mindset. You have a leader who's being intentional, who's being human, is gonna come in and is driving the leadership and culture within the organization. Those two together is really going to create a synergy that's going to even in the most difficult times, can contribute. I'm not going to say it's going to be the lone factor, but contribute to things getting better. Now, we talked about some of the obstacles here. And look, all the advice that we're offering you guys is free. It is free to simply ask somebody how they're doing, right? You know, I talked a little bit about recognizing people, just doing those little things. So Sarah, you know, when it comes to your experience and how you work with organizations, even what you do now, can you share some examples of like where recognition or emotional intelligence has really transformed the team?
Yeah, it's a huge one. So I think a piece of it, first of all, is that people have to feel like they have permission, either from themselves or from their organizations, usually both, to actually experience happiness at work or joy at work. I do think that the traditional view of success is sort of that angry male leader who stands up in front of the team with this sort of scowl on his face and, you know, very classically angry. And that's a choice, but maybe not the one that's right for you. So finding the way to give yourself permission to have happiness at work is really going to be important. And if you're not experiencing happiness at work, one of the things that I see a lot of times with teams is that people are in absolute conflict with their personal values, and they maybe don't even necessarily know it. I do think that far too many people don't have a conscious understanding of what their actual life values are. They may have been handed a basket of values from their family or from their culture or from their faith tradition, but they don't necessarily understand how those things actually play in their real life. So they're feeling this tension, this friction that's creating misery. They don't understand what's happening. So that's a piece of it as well. If you don't understand why, then you can't fix it. But some ways I've really seen this come to a positive fruition in the workplace is with tools like the 5 appreciation languages. So the 5 appreciation languages is a framework that is exactly the same as the 5 love languages, but it's used in workplace environments. And basically what it says is we as humans are a diverse and a crazy congregation of humans, and we experience life in different ways. And those can generally be clumped together into 5 different ways of experiencing appreciation, expressing, and receiving. So I have worked with teams where there was just a lot of friction, a lot of tension. And you mentioned the kudos thing, and that is a really great idea for people who like to be recognized in public. But some people really are super uncomfortable for lots of reasons with public recognition. So it's helpful to understand how a team member best receives or expresses appreciation, and the 5 appreciation languages is a great way to start to have that conversation. I worked with a team that was just having all kinds of problems, and they weren't bad humans, right? They were actually very intelligent. They were very kind people, but they, for some reason, just could not get on the same page. And it boiled down to that they had actually implemented a kudos method in their meetings, and people felt super uncomfortable. There were some people who were from different cultures, and that felt really like they were bragging, and it made them feel shameful that they had to like hide their behavior. So what we did was we worked through the 5 appreciation languages model, and people got to see how their colleagues preferred to be communicated with.
Give me the money, honey. You don't have to say it out loud for me. Give me the money, just behind the scenes.
I mean, it changes everything, right? It changed everything for them. And for some people, the way appreciation is going to be a gift card to the coffee shop on the corner. That is absolutely legitimate. For some people, it's going to be a high five or a fist bump, right? I mean, there are ways to have these conversations in the workplace that really acknowledge people as the humans that they are. And I think that changes the entire narrative. It's individualizing the recognition experienced in ways that actually feel good. Because the biggest problem I see with recognition is a lot of times it's just performative. You know, it's a plaque or it's a shout out in an email chain, but it doesn't even, if I had $1 for every time I've watched an executive team sign thank you cards to people that they have never met and will probably never meet, I could pay off my student loans today, right? Like it's not working. It's not authentic, and people know it. And so when companies are trying to be responsible stewards of their people, they're actually actively damaging those relationships in the process. So I think that there are a number of ways that organizations can do it well, but I do think that finding ways to individualize the conversation is a great first step in humanizing the people that are involved. That being said, right, I think we've talked about some different ways to approach this conversation, but the reality is when companies think about the work, what they're talking about is the work. And so how do you think that organizations can then find that sweet spot, that balance point between productivity, profitability, and that employee experience that may or may not encapsulate joy?
You're making me do so much personal reflection with these questions, because I realize how military I am. Like because I'm just like, you got to set the expectation. I mean, just because I want you to have joy, that doesn't mean that I don't have expectations for productivity, right? And I think that 2 realistic expectations, because we go back to that hierarchy of needs, you shouldn't be working. The expectation should not be for the employee to be working 14-hour days, right? Like, you got to set a realistic expectation and prioritize it. I was just looking at some information last night about, when you have these competing priorities, employees should be able to say, like, look, okay, you've given me 10 tasks. I'm not going to be able to deliver all 10 tomorrow, right? So what is the priority? And I think that too, that gives them some ownership, and that gives them a level of engagement to show that you're also recognizing that human side, that they deserve that balance, that they deserve. I talk a lot about work-life integration, Sarah, because I know that work never goes away, but I think that it's a term that's often so new to people that they think that the integration means. I'll coach some class, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I'm integrated." Yeah, I mean, shoot, I might even get up and work at 11 o'clock, and I'm like, that is not what I mean by work-life integration. Okay? That is
I'm
not
folding my laundry at my desk. Yeah,
right. Yeah, that is not what I meant by that. You're taking it too way to the left. But when we talk about being able to the need for productivity, it's like there's always going to be, even my own leadership style is to set clear expectations, but realizing within the parameter of the human experience. I really love what you said about the recognition that, and I want to respond to that because, right, people are going to respond differently to recognition. But to me, I love what you said about that 5 languages framework and using that to identify what really engages people and connects with them on an individual level. Because even if that gift card was $10, it's still like you're meeting that person at the individual level that they are. What I really appreciate that, though, within the context of this conversation, we typically have been going back and forth asking each other questions, but I want to make sure that I ask you a final question and I address it here within the context of that conversation, though. The whole point is recognizing the humanity of people. And no matter how you're doing this awards and recognition system, and giving people rewards, because sometimes I get those conflated, that you're doing something. And again, it never has, it can be a grand gesture. Like I said, hey, you made me laugh because I was like, hey, I'm the kind of person show me the money, right? But the key word that kept popping out in these discussions is humanity. And so in the context of the overall theme of these conversations, we're talking about DEIA and, not letting this conversation go by the wayside at a time where it's being challenged. I just want to put that out there, humanity and grace. When you make people feel included, when you seek to build connections with people at all levels, whether it's, us as individuals, despite race, gender, disability, sexuality, humanism goes above and beyond all of that. It rises to the top because it's inclusive of all of those things. And when you help employees to feel like they have this sense of connection, because you're probably wondering, why in the heck are we talking about workplace joy when it's supposed to be DEI? If you came to this discussion thinking that it was going to simply just be about that one-dimensional dynamic of DEI, what we're really trying to show you is that DEIA within itself, it is really the foundational for organizational culture. It is this holistic dynamic. And this piece, when we talk about the joy, it really brought out the humanism side, really getting to know and connecting with your employees as human beings. But I want to put this in context for you. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to answer that and give her last word. We're talking about the content, putting this in a way where we're recognizing the humanity of people, but it doesn't negate from the systemic and systematic barriers that people face. And if we fail to recognize that people are coming through the door experiencing these challenges, and while it may not be your job to, as an organization or as a leader, to solve those problems, it's also not your job to contribute to furthering those problems or extending them or making a situation worse by cultivating these environments where people feel excluded or they don't belong, when they're a key part of helping your organization to operate. So keep that in mind. Let me hand it over to you, Sarah.
I think that is such a powerful statement. And I do think that when the topic of DEI comes up, oftentimes people get frustrated because it feels like it's just this feel good conversation topic, or we're doing it because people want to like flex, right? They want to flex or something. I think when we talk about DEI, there are 2 angles that are important to consider. One, finding spaces for people to have equal opportunities across the board is good on its own sake. Like that is just that is fairness, that is equity, that is a reasonable thing to do just because it's the right thing to do. That's my perspective on it. But from an organizational perspective, why does it matter? And it matters because when people bring their whole toolkit, their whole lived experience into the problem-solving spaces that are today's work environments, you are going to get better results. That is not something you can deny. The statistics, the research, the data, the evidence is there. You don't have to like it, but it's real. And so I think when we talk about happiness and joy in the workplace, that's another space that helps us balance out all of the challenges that come with living a human life. There are a lot of challenges, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of complicated stuff that happens as part of the human experience. And simultaneously, there is a tremendous amount of joy to be found. And that is the space that helps us get through all of those other awful spaces. I think we cannot avoid the hard parts of life, but we can make them easier to bear. And when we get to the good spots, we can really celebrate and enjoy them. I believe that workplace joy is not just a feel-good measure. I believe it's a corporate imperative, because happy employees are going to work better for your organization. I don't care if your company makes more money, quite honestly. I care about the human experience, but the nice thing is everybody wins when we find that space.
And Sarah, thank you so much. I mean, we have 2 more of these discussions to go, and we talked about this is going to air at the end of February, early March, as we move into Black History and Women's History Month, 2 important months. But those discussions will not end there. We're going to bring it back later on this summer with the Diversity WORxK Roundtable series that we had last year. But we just want to keep this in mind. The title of this episode is The Science of Joy, of Workplace Joy, right? And is the Chief Happiness Officer. You heard it from an expert, right? That all of these components holistically are what is going to make up a happy and inviting work environment. And you have to, like my trickle down economics example, you have to realize the impact that you as an individual have on your organization. So we're going to stop right there. And until next time, we're glad you tuned in. If you want to have any questions, if you want to reach out to us with anything, if you have any comments, leave them in the comments and we'll respond to you. But thank you for tuning in to DEI Conversations, and have a great night. Cheers.